So let's have the panels, the first panel come up. This is on innovation pathways. And Bill Becker from Hazen and Sawyer will be leading this particular panel.
All right, as Manu mentioned, my name is Bill Becker. I'm the corporate drinking water practice leader for Hazen and Sawyer. I'm also an adjunct professor here at Columbia University. And this is a fascinating event today that's long overdue. As someone that's spent his entire career 30 years now in the drinking water industry, I find the topic way overdue, actually, and it's great to be here. Manu did a wonderful job setting the stage for today. Ali's presentation was very inspiring. It's nice to see what's going on. I had the opportunity the first 2 days of this week to attend the AMWA meeting. AMWA is the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. It was in DC, and its membership is essentially the executive directors, general managers, CEOs of the country's largest water utilities, public water utilities. And they meet a couple times a year, but they have a water policy conference in DC every spring, and it's members of Congress come, White House staffers come, the EPA administrator spoke, and many others on a variety of water issues. And like here, I think, in the back of everyone's mind, maybe more overtly there, was the Flint, Michigan water crisis. And I bring that up because I think the underlying issue with a lot of water infrastructure problems today in urban areas is going to repeat itself like it did in Flint. Maybe not in terms of lead, but there's a report that was just released on Monday. The governor's commissioned to look at what happened in Flint. It's fascinating reading. If you haven't done it, I highly suggest you download it and look at it. It touches on just about every aspect of the problem. The underlying issue to me is a funding issue, a finance issue. Manu mentioned that $1.7 trillion is needed by 2050 just to maintain the current level of service for infrastructure in this country. If you throw in climate change adaptation for utilities to prepare for extreme weather events, droughts, flooding, that's another $1 trillion. So we're talking big money. At the same time, so as a moderator, I read you should throw out a little controversy there, so I'll do this. Don't take this personally. But the president's budget this year calls for $257 million cut in state revolving funds, which goes towards water and wastewater infrastructure. There's also a proposal to start taxing municipal bonds, which increases the cost of borrowing, which essentially means there's less money for utilities to use, or rates have to go up even higher. So it's, there's pressure on funding from that angle. The biggest controversy, I think, is what happens in a lot of our cities, and it happened in Flint. As times got tight, they take money and they transfer it. It's called a transfer from the enterprise fund to the general fund. We're never going to solve the water issues in this country, in my mind, if we stop the excessive transfer of millions of dollars out of drinking water funds and use it for other city services. And that's something that needs to be paid a lot of attention. I don't think there's much data out there at all of who does that or how it happens, but it does happen. And that's what happened in Flint over the years. Many millions of dollars went from the water fund to the general fund, which means there's not the resources to hire good operators, to take care of the system and all of that. So those are underlying stresses on a water system, and it's really nice to see the innovations that are coming out, and that's really the purpose here today. What can we learn from other places in the world? What can we learn from here? What should we be doing? And with that, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. There's Christine Boyle from Valor Water Analytics, Albert Joe from Xylem, Pramod Karganecker from the National Science Foundation, and Ed Reiter from Dow Chemical. And I'd like to ask each one of them to take about 5 minutes to better introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll get to the main questions. So, okay. Christine.
Let's see. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and my name is Christine Boyle, and I'm the CEO and founder of Valor Water Analytics, and we are a Silicon Valley-based water tech company. I thought I'd take my 5 minutes to tell you how I got to be a water tech entrepreneur and kind of that path. I think there are a lot of students here, there are a lot of government people, a lot of private sector, but I think it's kind of an interesting story. So I started out as an activist here on the Columbia University campus many years ago, tromping around, trying to make a difference. And then went from there to academia at University of North Carolina and was there for 7 years working at the Environmental Finance Center, analyzing data, doing projects, doing wonderful things to help move the dial forward on, especially on water finance issues. And my father was an entrepreneur, and I had this like bubbling in my belly that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I ended up commercializing my technology, Valor Water Analytics, and moving to Silicon Valley and starting my company. And already as an entrepreneur, you could call me a irrational optimist. Like anyone who thinks that they can build a company is a little is defying the odds. And trying to start a company and move the dial in the water industry, that's taking it to another level. And I am reminded of that every day as I'm working with clients, mostly water utilities, to sell them water technology. But the time has come. We think that there really is a moment right now, maybe based on the California drought, based on different things, that the dial is moving forward on progress. And we haven't seen that in a long time. And I think Professor Lal would agree that this is kind of a exciting moment for progress in the industry. I wanted to tell you that what we're trying to do at Valor in terms of North Stars. The basic reason I wanted to be an entrepreneur in this industry is because I wanted to have an impact, and I wanted to see what would be the biggest impact, the way that we could move the dial in the water industry. And we're doing that by leveraging data, and I think Ollie would be excited to know there are billions of data points coming out of our utility systems every day. The electricity sector has captured them. The water sector has not captured them as well. But here are three. You're not supposed to have 3 North Stars, but we have 3. We're leveraging data in order to capture money to be reinvested in infrastructure, and that's on the order of, we've found that there are billions of dollars worth of missed revenue in water utilities. Water flowing through the pumps and through the taps that's simply not being collected by water utilities at all. It's called non-revenue water. We're able to capture that and return it back to our water utilities so that they can reinvest it in infrastructure. Gallons saved. We also know that there are billions of gallons a day flowing through pipes that are leaking into systems, not being captured. That's our other North Star, is how to capture those leaks. The third one is one of my favorites and is really interesting, is we are also leveraging technology to avert water cutoffs by customers. I was just in a community yesterday where they're cutting off 2,000 customers a month, cutting off their water. This is America. We think everyone should have the right to water. They have to pay for it, but you still should have water. And there's a huge amount of opportunity to leverage data to help avert cut off water, so we don't have situations like we saw what happened in Detroit many years ago, and things like that. So again, innovation is tough. It's tough in this sector, but the opportunity we have to move the dial forward through innovation in the sector is also very exciting. So I'm excited to talk about that all with everyone here today. Thanks.
Thanks, Christine. Albert?
Hi, is this on?
Why don't you use this one?
Great. There you go. Hi, everyone. I'm Al Cho from Xylem. For those of you who don't know Xylem, we're a global water technology company founded in 2011 from the spin-out of all of ITT Corporation's water assets. And that process was led by our founding CEO, Gretchen McLean, who's there in the audience, who I actually owe my presence at Xylem to. So been grateful to her ever since. So Xylem is a technology company. We have about $4 billion in revenue and about 150 companies. And our technologies really focus on the entire cycle of water, ranging from the drawing and the application of clean water to the collection and management of wastewater, and then the management of water in the natural environment. So the way to think about Xylem is trying to solve problems across the cycle of water. And when I define those problems, the way I usually describe them is water productivity, which is the process of basically making our water systems more efficient by eliminating waste, both of water, but also of the input and infrastructure costs associated with the delivery of clean water. Water quality, which is around taking the wastewater system and taking out the energy, the chemicals, the other operational costs that are often wasted in that system, while improving environmental quality at the same time. And then resilience, which is a big part of what we're going to talk about today with respect to reducing losses and risks associated with natural disasters and natural water problems. So the water industry generally, for those of you who don't spend all day thinking about it, is one of the most vital but simultaneously one of the most inefficient industries on our planet. Ollie mentioned some of this morning. Christine outlined some of the challenges with non-revenue water. But when you look at the input to output in the sector, productivity hasn't really improved in the water industry at all in the last couple of decades. And so when you think about water productivity, quality, and resilience, there's tremendous opportunity through innovation to reduce costs, to reduce waste, and that has to be a big part of the innovation that solves the financing problems in the water sector. And so we'll talk a little bit about this more later, but when I think to the future in terms of innovation trends that will help attack those sources of waste and cost in the water sector while improving productivity and quality, those really fall into three categories. The first being systems intelligence. So the water sector has been slow to adopt many of the information technology innovations, as we've heard a little bit about this morning, that have created significant productivity gains across the economy. And if that's sensing, if that's situational awareness, enabling predictive maintenance and process control and optimization, all of those technologies which have been so vital in other industrial applications will pay a big dividend in the water and wastewater sector as well. The second big technology is really around advanced treatment. We spend a lot of money right now with inefficient treatment processes to transform the quality of water, either from raw water to drinking water or from wastewater back to water that's clean enough to discharge into the environment. And this feels a bit like a family reunion because all of us were in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago at a conference we co-sponsored with the U.S. Water Partnership and the California State Drinking Water Board to look at the impact of disruptive technology innovation on the future of the water industry. And one of the core conclusions is that there are a lot of laboratory scale technologies out there that have the potential to transform, and not just incrementally, but disruptively transform the cost structure of water treatment, ranging from nanomaterials to additive manufacturing, synthetic biology. A lot of the things that you hear about, which are things that people at Columbia are probably spending a lot of time studying in a more abstract sense, have the potential to change the game in terms of the costs and economics of the water industry. And treatment is going to be a big part of that. And the third area, I think, it has to do with business model innovation, and it's what I'd call kind of water as a service. Just as you've seen in the energy sector, Ellie, you'd mentioned, the rise of merchant power. I think you're going to see an increasing diversity of ways that people deliver water services, whether that's through public-private partnerships, through merchant water, taking wastewater from municipal plants and delivering it at different qualities to industrial users. There are a lot of different ways to do water, and I think we're only at the very early innings of seeing how that works. So as an innovation and technology company focused in the water sector, we're really proud to be part of this conversation and look forward to talking a little bit more about that in the subsequent panel.
Thanks, Albert. Promote.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here this morning to talk about what the National Science Foundation is doing in the area of water. Before I do that, for those of you who don't know National Science Foundation, we are part of the federal government. And our charter is to fund fundamental research in all fields of science and engineering. So most of the focus is on university-based academic research, but we do have programs for small businesses and translation of basic research to useful products and services. focusing closely on the much more closely on the water issue, we invest approximately 80 to 90 million dollars a year in basic research in all areas of water. So we cover the whole thing. So our research investments range from understanding the hydrological cycle and modeling and so forth. It's a big part of our investment. And then water treatment, water processing, water reuse, many of the things that Al talked about, energy positive water treatment. Those are the kinds of things we are funding as part of this portfolio that cuts across all fields of science and engineering. So it's not just an engineering directorate, which is the one that I had activity, but it involves social behavioral economic sciences, because water use is fundamentally a social issue, if you will. We have programs in geological sciences, programs in biological sciences around water. So it covers the whole, all fields of science that work on water-related issues. There are, I want to highlight 3 signature investments that are particularly relevant. We fund 2 engineering research centers. So these are approximately $4.25 million a year, 10-year activity, oftentimes multi-university with a large industry and public sector partnership. The one is at Stanford in partnership with Berkeley and other universities. It's called Renovate, which is working on reinventing the urban water infrastructure. So just exactly the kind of issue that you pointed out, Professor Lal. So that's been going on for several years, and they're doing some amazing work. There is a large-scale experiment being done as I speak in Southern California out of the research that's been done at Renovate. The other one we just started last year, it's called Newt. It's nanotechnology-enabled water treatment. So this is for sort of small off-grid type of applications of water treatment. And it's leveraging sort of the latest advances in nanotechnology to create new solutions. There's a third center, which is not an ERC. It's an industry cooperative research center at University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee on water sensing. Because I think water quality issue is paramount, and we are funding work there, among other places, but that's the one I wanted to highlight for this morning, creating new sensing technologies. And we can come back to it in sort of the Q&A. In terms of what we are doing now and what will happen in the next 4 to 5 years, last year, the foundation crafted a foundation-wide initiative. So it involves all directorates, and it's a focused program called Infuse. It stands for Innovations at the Nexus of Food, Energy, and Water Systems. So the premise of the program is to say water is not a standalone problem. Water must be thought of as a problem that connects with energy system. And I can go into all the reasons why, but it's completely obvious, I think, once you hear the story. So food, water, and energy are coupled systems, and they depend on each other in myriad ways. So the premise of Infuse is to get people to think about this as a coupled system and work on it. The program is in 4 tracks. The first track is advanced modeling of this coupled system. So just the kinds of things that we saw this morning in Professor Lal's talk, but now bringing together energy and water systems and creating computational models to understand how the system behaves under various circumstances and stress points and so forth. Second track is what you might think of it as sort of cyber infrastructure, data, computation, interfaces to human decision makers, because these systems interact with humans through myriad ways, and we want to create very usable interfaces so that you can use all the data to make the right decisions. So that's second track. Third track is science and engineering solutions to the coupled system problem. So there are many problems you can imagine. An example would be energy positive water treatment. Can you recover phosphorus from wastewater? I mean, so there are lots and lots of questions you can ask that pertain to this coupled system. And so the third track will seek projects that can come up with really clever, breakthrough type of engineering and science solutions to this coupled system problem. And fourth, which arguably could be the most important track, is educating the next generation of scientists and engineers and students who can work on these problems, because these problems are going to be with us for the next 50 years. So the fourth track is just creating the scientific workforce to innovate. That program was launched this year once we got the FY16 budget. And as I speak, we received 400 proposals. I just got the number 2 days ago. We will be doing the reviews and making grants in the coming months. And so expect the launch of a really major initiative at the National Science Foundation, which I anticipate, again, we depend on annual budget cycle with Congress. I would imagine this would be like a 6 year initiative at least. So we are really excited about Infuse, and I'll stop there, and then we can, in Q&A, get into some more details. Thank you.
Thanks, Pramod. Ed?
Okay, I'd like to also thank the organizers for the opportunity to be on the panel, and in particular to provide the perspective of industry. As you may know, the chemical industry is a large user of water for cooling, running our processes, et cetera, but we're also a large solutions provider. Dow Chemical is an example of that. Dow's a $52 billion company, but within Dow, we have a water and process solutions company that's about $1 billion company, and that provides the broadest range of water solutions out there at the moment, across filtration to reverse osmosis. Water is important to industry for a number of reasons, and scarcity is important as well. It's projected that by 2050, industrial demand for water will increase some 400%. Industry has been active in this space from 2011 to 2014. Industry invested some $84 billion in water infrastructure. Water is important not only from the quantity perspective, but also the quality perspective. When there is drought, the water in surface water has higher TDS, higher BOD, other issues which cost more energy and chemicals to clean up. So water is also very important from that perspective. A company like Dow can have a large impact in water purification. Dow, just the reverse osmosis membranes that we put out are active in producing 15 million gallons per day of water throughout the entire planet. That's 3 gallons of water per person per day for every single person on this planet. Combined with the other people in industry, we can have a large impact then not only on the water that we use, but on the water solutions that we provide to municipalities, to emerging countries, to many other areas of the world. My position at Dow, I sit in the Environmental Technology Center, but I also am the facilitator for Dow's corporate water strategy team. We've had several goal sets dealing with environmental footprint through the years. The most recent goal set that was announced in April has 3 principal goals that connect with water. The first is to reduce freshwater intake on an intensity basis at key water stress sites by 20% by 2025. It's going to be a significant challenge because we're already fairly optimized in many of those areas. But yet water stress is very important to us and provides a significant challenge. The second is circular economy. That is enhancing our ability to reuse, recycle, and reclaim water where we can at our industrial facilities. And these are typically done not by Dow Chemical alone, but in partnership with communities, other industrial partners, and also policymakers. And I'll give some examples of that during our panel discussion. The third we think is also important, and that is working with nature. Dow has worked with the Nature Conservancy and others for many years to work with nature instead of against it, particularly in the area of water. So with that, I look forward to the panel, a discussion, and questions you might have. Bill?
Great. Thanks, Ed. So our first question is on a premise that we can often learn from other examples around the world. And the question is, what are some innovative or efficient methods of utility operation, financing, and governance in foreign countries that may be useful in the U.S. context? And I'll start by maybe asking Christine.
Thanks, Albert. So we had a phone discussion talking about this the other day, and I had some ideas, and all my ideas changed.
I'm not sure that's fair.
So, I mean, I think everyone in the audience knows we can look to places. We can look to Australia and how they've dealt with their drought over the years. We can also look to Singapore and their new water program. Many of the arid states, including Israel, have really innovative ways of utility operations, efficiency, supply generation, and there's a lot to be learned there. So the one thing I wanted to talk about today is what I was thinking about, because I've been at water utilities. I've been at like 10 in the last 4 days or something. But you know what's really cool happening across the United States is state level things, and I thought it'd be before we looked out into the whole world, and I hope other folks on the panel can talk about the world, but I just wanted to point out a few things happening at the state level here in the United States that are really interesting. And before we go and search the rest of the world, I thought it'd be interesting to look to the foreign state of Georgia, down in the South. Georgia, in 2010, put in place the most aggressive water loss control laws in the country. And it rarely happens that things would flow from Georgia to California, but it did happen this year, because the SB 555 water loss control in California is fully modeled off of Georgia. And that's really interesting. And I think that there's a lot to learn state to state. And those are the only two states right now that have water loss control laws. Another thing, going back to what you said, was about the transfers of funds between the enterprise funds and the general budgets. The state of North Carolina has some of the most innovative financing regulations around water utility finance that have helped elevate North Carolina water utilities to some of the most soundly financially managed water utilities in the country, including a prohibition of that exact thing that you were talking about.
Great.
So my 2 cents is along the sense of, and I think other folks can talk more about international, but I just kept thinking, like, let's look to the states that are doing things really well and see how we can replicate things from state to state, as well as looking abroad.
Yeah, there are many utilities that are very, very well operated, and they have sound financial position and all that, and there's others that are a disaster, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, any of the other panelists have anything to add on this question? Ed?
I mentioned a couple things. One, Christine, thanks for pointing out the state level innovations. One that I'll note is in the water quality area. That deals with nutrients. Nutrients is a common challenge, and it impacts not only municipalities but also industries. When there are high nitrogen levels or phosphorus, the algae buildup, of course, clogs membranes used for purification of the water. Iowa has come up with a $3 per acre incentive for not only most efficient practices for cropping, but also for additives that would keep nitrogen present in the non-ionized form. If it's in the non-ionized form, that helps to keep it going into the water. So that's one that I'll mention from the state level. Thanks for the lead in there, Christine.
Yeah.
The second one I'll mention is from Europe. And in Europe, they have something called the E4 water program. And the E4 water program is a concerted effort to develop, test, and validate new integrated approaches, methodologies, and process technologies. It aims to reduce the fresh water use 20 to 40%, wastewater use 30 to 70%, energy use 15 to 40%, and also, at the same time, to give direct economic benefits to those in the industrial cases where they're deploying these pilot studies. So we've had the opportunity to be involved in one of these cases at our large production facility in Terneuzen in the Netherlands. What we did there is we worked with the city of Terneuzen. We worked with the local water provider called Avitas to improve their water system so that we could take the wastewater from the city of Terneuzen. Avitas cleans it up using a bioreactor. Then we're able to take that industrial water and to use it 3 times in industry. First of all, we use it for our processes. Then we use it for cooling tower water. And then finally, we use it for a couple other applications before it's vented to atmosphere. This program, the E4 water program, was enhanced because of the policymakers enabled it with matching funding, and they helped to lower some of the barriers for recycle reuse. So I would suggest some of the things that we can leverage from those in Europe are the enhancement of the policy environment and also supportive funding to accelerate those kinds of programs.
Thanks, Ed. Our next question is managing extremes. Peaking capacity and drought reserve capacity may contribute a significant part of the financing costs of urban water infrastructure. What financial and technical options are available to reduce these? Albert?
Well, thanks. I think that goes straight to this issue of water resilience. I don't know if you were to guess how many natural disasters in the United States happen each year with an impact of more than $1 billion, what would you guess? 2, 4, 5? The answer is actually more than 10. When you look at NOAA data for the last 5 to 6 years, the average number of events in the United States, natural disasters, mostly floods and droughts that have more than $1 billion of impact, is over 10. And in aggregate, on an annual basis, the cost is about 60 billion or more. That's a big amount. And when you think about how natural disasters are primarily experienced through water, either because you no longer have it, or because you have too much, or you have the wrong kind, it shows you why disasters, extremes, etc., will become a greater stressor, particularly with the impacts of climate change, on a system which we've all been saying is already barely keeping it together as it is. So your question was really around technologies, finance, etc. How do we actually solve that problem? I'm going to point us back to this issue of innovation. On 3 dimensions. I think when we're talking about either droughts or floods and creating a technology and financing ecosystem around that, it boils down both to disruptive technology innovation, which I think is necessary to change the curve between now and 2030 or 2050, as Manu was saying. But it also has to do with better implementation through business model innovation of technologies we already have. And last off, I think there's a key element around stakeholder engagement, and I'll go through that probably for droughts and for floods. On the drought side, I think the key areas are around situational awareness, basically understanding what our water supply is, what it's doing, how it's changing, conservation and efficiency, and around expanding our supply portfolio with new sources of unconventional waters, including water recycling and reuse. And on the flood side, I think you see a similar set of technologies around sensor technologies that help us with early warning and forecasting and communications, improving the absorptive capacity of urban water infrastructure through a fusion of more efficient drainage infrastructure and green and natural infrastructure, and improvements in asset positioning and responsiveness that help you react and bounce back from disasters better. When I think about the core kind of elements of business model innovation, technology innovation, and stakeholder engagement, let me just give you a couple of examples and then maybe throw it open to the rest of the panel. On the business model side, I think there is a big issue here around leveraging the cash flows associated with making our water infrastructure more efficient. We did a study last year which looked at the energy efficiency improvement potential in wastewater infrastructure around the world and found that you could cut the electricity consumption of much of the wastewater infrastructure by half in a way that would be NPV positive. And capturing those gains would actually free up $40 billion in NPV around the world, which is capital the sector sorely needs to make new investments in increasing adaptive capacity. So I think there's some business model innovations around going after the OpEx efficiencies, which can fuel new investment. I think on the technology side, I'd encourage people to think about the membrane technologies and the sensor technologies, which will enable public trust and confidence in water recycling and reuse, which really should be at a much higher level in the United States than it is today. But I think equally, one of the biggest changes, I think, in the last 5 years, which has big potential and promise for the sector, is a recognition of the role of green and natural infrastructure in building resilience. But I think there you're going to also need to see an increase in public confidence in the effectiveness and capacity of green infrastructure, which I think will be underpinned by improvements in sensing, monitoring, and engineering that will help people understand how green infrastructure creates co-benefits that can be monetized, captured, and relied upon in situations of storms. And the last thing I'd say just on the public engagement and stakeholder engagement piece is that these technologies only get rolled out when people are okay with them, because water, as George Hawkins from DC often says, is the only public utility that we physically ingest. And when you think about public and stakeholder engagement, the other thing that's changed in the last 5 years is a dramatic shift in public opinion on the acceptability of water reuse as a natural source of supply to combat water scarcity. Earlier this month, we released a survey in California, which basically showed that 76% of Californians now believe that water reuse is a critical part of the future water security strategy for the state and are perfectly comfortable with using it. And that's, I think, a little bit counterintuitive to those of us who've often thought that it's really hard to get people's head around using sewage as a wastewater supply, as a water supply. But it points to the need for innovation and the stakeholder engagement to support it.
I want to highlight a program that we at NSF launched 2 years ago in relation to your question. It's called CRISP. It stands for Critical Resilient Interdependent Infrastructure Systems. The aim of the program is to study how we can make our infrastructure more resilient to kind of events that Al talked about. And it's sort of based on 3 basic ideas. One is to recast infrastructure as a service. So just rethink all infrastructure as service rather than as a bunch of hard pipes carrying water or transport or electricity. So that's one fundamental idea. And we heard about water as a service concept. Second is to leverage infusion of sensors, computation, communication, wireless, what you might call as Internet of Things that is just happening in front of our eyes. So this is going to give you much greater awareness of the state of the system on essentially a real-time basis. And in the networks piece, we think both sort of the physical wireless network or wired network, but also the social network. So as a great example, as a great illustration of that idea, was that after Hurricane Sandy, people found out where the closest gas station that had gas using Facebook and not by watching television, which was the case probably after Hurricane Katrina. So there is this dramatic change in sharing of information that's happening. So that's sort of the second piece of it. And the idea is to study and come up with solutions as to how we can make our infrastructure more resilient in 2 senses. One, when you're hit by an event, you minimize the down part of the cycle in terms of service delivery by reconfiguring elements and so forth. And the second is how can you bring it back up as quickly as possible to some reasonable level of service provisioning. And we think there is just tremendous opportunity to rethink infrastructure, especially as we rebuild a lot of the infrastructure to make it resilient by leveraging these types of ideas. So we have funded 2 rounds of projects under this. And again, this is probably something that will go on for at least another couple of cycles. So there is a whole body of knowledge that's being created under this program that speaks to resilience.
Go ahead, Christine.
So I was just thinking of a statement by Bill Clinton. Is the economy stupid? Well, as far as managing peak capacity in California during the extreme drought, is stop watering your friggin' lawns in the desert, stupids. So, I mean, there are a lot of really complicated answers, and I don't want to oversimplify that, but, you know, what LADWP did in terms, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power did in terms of giving out turf replacement rebates to offset the seasonal peaking of watering your lawns. I mean, there are some things that are kind of like, duh. And and not to, and no, I'm a technologist, so it's not just like duh, but we can leverage data, and what we're doing is we're telling consumers like, hey guys, you're using all this water to keep your grass green. There are other ways. There are lots of things going on in California around budget-based rates and trying to get people to not water their lawns. So I think we can kind of look at kind of the obvious things that are low-hanging fruit, and as well the whole spectrum all the way to like very advanced technologies too.
I was just gonna build on that by saying,
Talk into the microphone.
okay, at the basis of your question, I think we need to change the way that we think about the word extremes. For water, we tend to really be most concerned about it when there is a severe issue. When there's a drought, we have to have continuity in the way that we think about that. We also need to think about water from a different viewpoint, and that is with a probabilistic perspective on risk. We should think of water in the way that we do with hurricanes. We have several large production facilities right on the Gulf Coast, and we think of the risk about that, not only the occurrence of a hurricane, which is seasonal, we know when they're going to come approximately, but we don't know the impact, and the impact can of course be severe, the same with water. Second, I think we need to improve the efficiency with which we use and manage water. We mentioned the circular economy, reuse, recycle, and reclaim our impaired waters. A study done a few years ago showed that surface water bodies impaired some 50% in the U.S. There's a lot of impaired water out there that can be brought back to use through the technologies that we even have today. Third, I'll point out conjunctive groundwater and surface water use. And what I mean by that is that we should look at groundwater aquifers not as something that we can just readily tap into whenever we're short of water, but a resource that we have to continue to resupply through aquifer recharge, and we use the aquifers when we most need them, not all the time. For example, if it's going to be a really dry year, maybe we don't want to plant rice, which uses a lot of water. If it's going to be a wet year, of course, rice would be good. And the third thing I'll mention is courageous collaborations. It's going to take a lot of stakeholders coming together to address some of these challenges. We've had some experience at doing some of that. I'll mention our facility again in the Netherlands, where combining with the municipality, policymakers, and a local water company, we process some 10,000 meters cubed a day of water. Now that's got several different benefits for us. It helps us to generate steam, enable production and cooling tower water, but it does a couple other things for us as well. It's reduced the energy demand of working with water at the site by 95%. And at the same time, it's reduced our greenhouse gas there by 60,000 tons per year. So again, the energy connection, the greenhouse gas connection can also be important in how we manage extremes.
Thanks. Moving on to, I'm going to go to question 4 here because I think we touched on some of the others already. So it's linking industry, research, and policy. And the question is, how do we better integrate research between academia and industry and policy makers? Is there a better model than the current linear model of invent and demonstration and concept and lab, scale up, and optimize in the field?
Yeah, so we think about this one a lot because we fund exactly the kind of research that you talked about. And so there are some lessons we have learned over the years. So our ERC model is like the big one, $4 million a year that basically goes into university-based research. And typically these centers, it's been around for 30 years, so we have a lot of experience in running these things. Typically we'll have 15, 20, 25 industry members who will contribute financially to the center's research, and then they get a role in setting the research agenda. I mean, they get sort of every 6 months or every 3 months, they come together, ask the question as to what are the research problems being studied, and so on and so forth. So we have kind of, refined that model of connecting academic research with industry uptake, and, it leads to FDA-approved devices. I mean, so there are a lot of examples of real success that comes out of this kind of a thing. What's interesting about the area that we are talking about at this workshop is that the user of research in this case is not necessarily private industry. I mean, private industry is potentially a user, but equally the public sector is also a user of the research that comes out of a research center in this space. So that changes the business model for center-based research, because now you've got a mix of non-profit type of players, public entities like municipal government and so on and so forth. And in both Renuit and in the Newt Center, we are kind of rethinking this model of connecting university-based research to partners that are a mix of private and public sector, non-profit, and so forth. So so there are these examples that we have learned in terms of connecting basic university research to users. I want to conclude with two additional thoughts. One is you can imagine two different pathways by which, say, an innovation based on research finds its way in the real world. One is it's a real intervention. Maybe it's a clever, very cheap sensor. You productize it, you sell it, and you make money and make a big difference to the world. I think that's one model, and that will have some traction and some possibilities. But I think the other much bigger model is going to be multi-sector partnerships. So to make real impact on the kind of problem that we are talking about, it's going to require multi-sector partnership between private sector, public sector, government, various levels of government ranging from city to state to the federal government. And I think that those types of things are much, much harder. But what's interesting is there is now quite a bit of literature that's emerging about these types of multi-sector partnerships. So I'll just highlight a couple of things that I know in some depth. One is called the Collective Impact Framework. It's something that FSG, which is a social impact consulting firm, and they have come up with this idea of how do you get multiple stakeholders to come together to solve a major societal problem like water would be. And so they have this framework which has 5 elements, which is a common goal, shared measurements, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communications, and a backbone organization that connects all these players. I mean, I would recommend kind of just looking through all that work. It's really very, very fascinating as to how do you structure these multi-sector partnerships to achieve major progress. So that's one. And they have great examples like teenage substance abuse and obesity and so on and so forth. They've worked on some really hard problems that you would think would be really challenging. The second is comparative studies of multi-sector partnerships. And so there is some recent work coming out of the Grantham Institute at London School of Economics, where what they did is to study multi-sector partnerships in Durban, South Africa, and Rotterdam in Netherlands, and I think they study London. And they kind of evaluate how different kind of models were brought together where different entities came together to address, and they were all sort of climate change related issues. So how did these entities come together to address? And there are examples of both success and not such great success. So the point I'm trying to make is that this is hard. This is really, really hard. And to sustain it over many years is going to be really hard. But the good news is this is being studied systematically, scientifically from a social science perspective. And I think it would be really, really important to imbibe those lessons as we think about solving the water problems.
If
I could just add one
industry. Okay, yes.
I just want to add one thing to what Pramod was saying, because again, when we brought about 80 plus chief technology officers from different US companies with utility operators, other experts, many of whom are in the room, to San Francisco to talk about technology and innovation in the water sector, 3 conclusions came to the fore when we did some audience voting and engagement. The first was when we looked at the range of potentially exciting technologies for the water sector, the consensus was that we actually have a great pipeline of basic technologies, and NSF is funding a lot of them. So a lot of the right areas of focus. But the second major conclusion was that we're not funding anywhere near at the scale we need to accelerate the deployment and development of these technologies. The third conclusion is interesting, that if there were more resources, the preponderance of people who were there felt like the most important and impactful way to deploy new resources in the commercialization and development of new technologies in the water sector wasn't necessarily to put it all into basic research, but instead to work at that nexus between commercialization and deployment, to create large-scale national funding to help financially strapped utilities create test beds and pilot facilities to take technologies that are being developed, validate and accelerate their commercialization to manufacturing scale, and make them available for application in the industry. So again, I think we have great technologies. We're funding a lot of the right areas, but we need more money, and we need to put it into the hands of people who can test it and make it commercially viable.
Thanks. And the theme of money brings us to our last question again, which is paying for infrastructure. How do utilities need to adapt through new business models and make a case for infrastructure updates and restructuring to reduce the probability of system failure and its associated economic impacts? And Christine? And this is the last question from here, and then we'll entertain questions from the audience.
This is a big question. So a couple data points. I was just in Sacramento with all the water utilities from around the state of California, and the aggregate amount of revenue decline during the drought has now topped $500 million. So there's so many things that are going on related to the fact that the utilities on aggregate in California their revenues are down by $500 million. If they raise rates, customers get mad. They're like, why am I paying more to use less water? They're not able, therefore, they're barely making their O&M budgets and are having a very difficult time thinking about reinvesting. So that's when the state is getting very involved in putting money forward. So this, the essential conundrum of folks, the utilities are selling less water, so how are they supposed to incentivize conservation and pay for new infrastructure? Maybe we can figure that out today. That would be pretty great. So that's one data point of this area of conservation and how difficult it is because the business model of water supply is essentially quite broken. And there needs to be a lot of new thought. George Hawkins at DC Water there's a lot of thought about like we're selling a service, we're not selling water. There's a lot of good thought going on about that. One other data point that I think is interesting is, there are 50, and we keep talking, I always feel like agriculture gets the short shrift when I'm talking because I don't know that much about it. I'm talking about urban water. Hopefully someone else can touch on agriculture. But there are 52,000 water utilities in the United States of America, and roughly the top 10% of those, the top, let's say 500 of those, serve about 80% of the population. So when you think about the other 54,000 water utilities and how tiny they are and the amount of populations that they're serving, it really comes to this question of scalable infrastructure. So let's say it costs 10 million bucks to build a wastewater treatment facility. That's the minimum you're going to pay for a decent sized wastewater treatment facility. So if there are 54,000 water utilities and one of them is serving 1,000 and another is serving 10,000 and another is serving 20,000, imagine the economies of scale if you're spending that much money on to serve such a small population. So there's this idea that's very controversial right now, but I'll just throw it out there, of consolidating a lot of smaller systems into more regionalized systems and thinking about regionalized infrastructure on both the supply, thinking about reclaim, thinking about wastewater treatment. So some of those things, but let me tell you, when you go talk to that guy who runs that 400 person water supply, that guy does not want to consolidate. He does not want to join with his neighbors. He's been doing it for 30 years. He's excited about his shop. He doesn't want to do that. So there's a lot of entrenched interest to kind of do what all of us sitting here think is just the smart thing to do. So the solutions aren't easy, but thinking about consolidation, regionalization, joint infrastructure projects, as well as when we get into stormwater and other things, thinking about, on the flip side of it, more decentralized financing approaches. So just to throw out there, we all talk about fragmentation. There are options to do it. It's going to take a lot of hard effort on the part of both the federal government as well as state level and regional governments to get to a place where we're thinking about infrastructure at economies of scale that align with simply the amount of dollars that are on the table to fund it. So throw those things out there.
Thanks. That's a really good point. I mean, there are some good examples of some states that have encouraged water utilities to come together and wastewater utilities, but there aren't nearly enough. And sometimes it's not just that one guy, it's a political difference.
Yep.
Some cities Democrats and others Republicans, and we don't want our water mixing, let alone our people mixing. So it's an interesting problem, but something that needs to be dealt with. Are there questions from the audience at this point? I'd like to ask you to please come and stand at the microphone and ask the question. Thank you.
We actually have the note cards, though. Did you write your question down? No.
Oh, you have no cards? Okay.
Yeah. I think it's more. If we have time for all of them, maybe we can.
All right. So these questions aren't my own, but they do come from the audience. And the first one relates to industrial water use. It was mentioned on the panel that industrial demand for water is expected to increase nearly 400% by the year 2050. And the audience was interested in greater explanation, reasons, and drivers behind that increase, and what opportunities are there for efficiency improvements in the industrial sector.
Okay, well, thanks for the question, whoever raised it. Part of the reason why it's increasing the demand is, of course, growing populations' demand for advanced solutions to some of the problems that we face today. That's part of the growth. I think it's a large part just in population growth and a need for more product. The second part of the question is, what can industry do to improve efficiency? I think an integrated approach is one of the things I would put forward. That's integration not only of the treatment of water, but the reuse of water, and then the integration, as I mentioned, also with nature, so that we can capture rainwater runoff, for example, and that can be used as a buffer for us, not only to use in the industrial processing, but also at the same time to perhaps use that for recharge of groundwater aquifers. Wetlands can and have done in nature several different purposes, and we need to tap into those multiple purposes.
Thanks. I just want to take my liberty as moderator to ask one follow-up question to the panelists. Industries do use a lot of water, certain industries more than others. It seems like a lot of them like to be located in Southern California, where there isn't any water. And there's other parts of the country where there's plentiful water, and the infrastructure is already there. It's actually not being used to its capacity. Do you see any way or reason to get some industries that are large water users to move to those types of areas, or to build new facilities in those types of areas?
Yes, I've got a couple of comments on that. First is that even in environments that are very water dry, again, reuse is something that industry can do to minimize use. The second thing I'll note is that we need to think of it as pass-through use in many cases, that industry will use it for cooling, and the water goes back to the environment except that which is evaporated. Evaporation is a large amount of loss, however. It can be 25% of some of the water that we take in at some of our sites. And it hasn't been economic to recapture some of that water. That's a potential area for innovation. And also integration. If we can pull some of that water back and also decrease the energy across the whole cycle, that might provide some improvements. The second part, Bill, of your question inherently is location. Oftentimes industry will locate close to where the population, again, is due to decreasing energy of shipment and raw materials, other kinds of things to minimize that. But you see, of course, along the Gulf Coast that there's a large amount of industry that is there, and there's a heck of a lot of water there, so that's not an issue, except for the fact that along areas such as the Brazos River in Texas, municipal agricultural demand has increased several-fold over the last several decades, creating real constraints there when there is a drought. So one of the things that industry is even looking at is the possibility of not only the short-term things such as the recycle reuse, but also a potential for desalination in the future.
Good. Thanks. Next question.
Okay, the next question from the audience revolves around financing options. What do the panelists feel are viable future options for financing much needed water infrastructure maintenance and improvement? And is there a role for the private sector?
Let's see. I think there's a lot of innovation going on in the sector around financing right now. So as far as, I'll start at the end, the role for private sector is yes. I mean, there can be very positive returns on investments made into water and water infrastructure. We're seeing that even the bond market is quite active in municipal bonds. They have been for a long time. We also see that the states are providing low-interest loans through their state revolving loan funds. I've seen some really interesting privately funded projects, like, for example, the Carlsbad desalination project is a joint public-private partnership, private financing dollars through this giant company called Poseidon, public matched through operational funds through the San Diego Water Authority. So I think there are a lot of emerging and really innovative financing structures. I think we need to see more public-private partnerships and more willingness of both the public sector who's building the projects and the private sector who's funding them to distribute the risk in ways that make sense for both parties. But I think there's infrastructure finance banks are a really, really great way to jumpstart some of those conversations.
Next question.
Okay, and I think one of the last questions from the audience relates to perhaps a greater expansion on the consolidation of utilities that you mentioned, with the caveat that perhaps there is a need for sort of greater rethinking in terms of who is served, who is not, especially considering suburban sprawl in the United States, and what sort of decisions does the panel feel need to be made in terms of who gets served by public water utilities and who does not?
I mean, let's see. I mean, in California right now, the State Water Resource Control Board is going crazy right now. They're spending almost all of their money and time running around and to pockets of communities in California that have simply run out of potable water. Potable water is clean, but drinking water that's suitable for human health. So there is this question, and I certainly don't have an answer for it, but yes, of course, there are public water facilities and there are people that build homes that aren't accessible to public water facilities. So the question is it the public's job to build really expensive pipes to service those homes, or is it incumbent on a citizen to gravitate towards a place that has an affordable water system? I think the answer is, and we have some friends here from the private water industry too, is that some of these communities will end up paying high prices for water because providing water is expensive, and a lot of it may be done through private and like homeowner association type of facilities, because sometimes it's just too expensive to provide water to kind of remote places in rural communities that the costs are just prohibitive and don't allow those folks to have access to water at an affordable price. So it's a very big public policy question, but I think that if they want to have water, they can, but it's very expensive.
Probably varies from state to state, but you can't just go build a home wherever you want. You usually have to, is there groundwater accessible? Does it perk well so you can put a septic tank in and all that? So it does vary state to state. Okay, I guess we're out of time at this point, so we'll move on to the second panel. But before we do, I'd like to give a big round of applause to our panelists.